the first time I understood that my father's empty house was worth more than every occupied house on his street combined. I was standing barefoot in his dining room with a crowbar in my hand and $9 million beneath my feet. Not $9 million in cash. There were no stacks of bills, no gold bars, no movie scene suitcase waiting beneath the floorboards. There was a narrow steel compartment hidden between two joists, wrapped in roofing felt and sealed behind oak planks my father had nailed down nearly 30 years earlier. Inside it were 3 safe deposit keys, a handwritten ledger, an old cassette tape, and a trust document showing assets valued at just over $9 million. The trust had my name on it. The signature beneath it belonged to my father, and the attorney who had notarized it was the same man who had looked me in the eye at the funeral and told me my father had died almost penniless. I sat on the dusty floor for a long time, staring at those papers while rain tapped against the windows. My father had been dead for 11 days. His wife had already removed everything she considered valuable. His lawyer had already urged me to sell the house quickly, and someone had called a contractor that morning, pretending to be me, asking how soon the dining room floor could be torn out. At first, I thought the house had protected my father's secret. Later, I understood something more disturbing. The floorboards had not merely hidden the money, they had hidden evidence of who had been trying to steal it. Good day, dear listeners. It's Nora again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Nora Ellis. I was 43 years old when my father died, and I worked as a billing compliance supervisor for a regional hospital network in Cincinnati. It was not glamorous work. Most days I sat beneath fluorescent lights, reviewing insurance claims, coding disputes, duplicate charges, and payment adjustments. I supervised 6 people, carried my lunch in the same blue canvas bag for 8 years, and kept a small jar of peppermint candies beside my computer because patients sometimes came to our office, frightened about bills they did not understand. My job had taught me that financial wrongdoing rarely announces itself with a siren. Usually it looks like an ordinary number in an ordinary column, a date that does not match, a payment posted twice, a signature placed where a signature should not be. People imagine fraud as something dramatic. In reality, it often survives because everyone is too busy, too trusting, or too embarrassed to ask why the numbers do not add up. My father used to say that was why I had become so difficult to lie to. He meant it as a compliment. I was not always sure. His name was Daniel Ellis. He had been a residential carpenter for most of his life, the kind of man who could look at a crooked doorway and tell you which wall had shifted. He knew wood by smell. He could run his thumb along a board and tell whether it had dried too quickly. He could hear a floor creak and know whether the sound came from a loose nail, settling foundation, or water damage. After my mother died when I was 26, my father changed, not suddenly. Grief rarely works that way. He became quieter in small increments. He stopped going to the hardware store on Saturday mornings unless he needed something. He left the radio off while he worked. He kept my mother's coffee mug above the sink even though he never used it. For 5 years, he lived alone in the house where I had grown up, a modest brick home on Birch Hollow Road. Then he met Elaine Mercer. Elaine was polished in a way my father was not. She wore cream-colored coats, remembered birthdays, and sent handwritten thank you notes after dinners. She had worked for years as an executive assistant at a private wealth management firm. She knew how to organize documents and speak to professionals in a tone that suggested she belonged in every room she entered. When my father married her, I tried to be relieved. He laughed more around her. He traveled twice, once to Savannah and once to Montreal. She convinced him to replace the old sofa and repaint the kitchen. She persuaded him to attend a cardiologist appointment he had postponed for years. For a while, I believed she had returned him to life. But marriages, like houses, can look stable while pressure gathers behind the walls. The first warning sign appeared 3 years before my father died. He called me at work and asked whether I had ever heard of a company called Northbridge Asset Recovery. I told him I had not. He said the name had appeared on a bank statement. What kind of transaction? I asked. There was a pause. Consulting fee. How much? Not much. My father's definition of not much could mean $30 or $30,000. Dad, $14,000. I stopped typing. Did you hire them? No. Did Elaine? She says it's connected to tax planning. Then your accountant should be able to explain it. Another pause. My father was not a man who liked being told what to do, but that day he sounded less stubborn than ashamed. I'll ask, he said. A week later, he told me it had been a misunderstanding. I asked what kind. He said Elaine had moved money into a temporary account to improve the return. That did not explain a consulting fee, but he changed the subject. I let him. I regret that sometimes. Then I remind myself that adults are allowed to make decisions we do not understand. Love does not give us permission to storm into someone else's marriage carrying a flashlight. Over the next 2 years, other small things appeared. My father stopped receiving paper statements at the house. Elaine began answering his phone. When I visited, she stayed in the room during conversations that used to be private. Once, while helping him sort tools in the garage, I found a certified mail receipt addressed to a lawyer named Martin Vale. Before I could ask about it, my father folded it and placed it in his shirt pocket. Estate planning? I asked. Something like that. Should I know about it? Not yet. He smiled when he said it, but his eyes moved toward the kitchen door where Elaine was standing. That was the first time I felt it. Not proof, not even suspicion, just the emotional equivalent of a number in the wrong column. Something did not reconcile. Martin Vale was not a stranger. He had handled property closings in our neighborhood for years and had prepared the documents when my father bought a small rental duplex after retiring from full-time carpentry. He was respected, soft-spoken, and careful with his appearance. His ties were always dark blue. His shoes looked newly polished even in winter. When I was a child, my father had repaired Martin's porch after storm damage. Martin paid him promptly and later helped him with a zoning dispute. Their relationship lasted more than 20 years. That history mattered because trust is often the first tool used against careful people. A stranger must convince you. A trusted person only has to remain familiar. 6 months before my father died, he began calling me on Tuesday afternoons, always Tuesday, usually around 4:30. He would ask about my job, my apartment, or whether I was still thinking about buying a small house outside the city. The conversations were ordinary, but he often ended them with the same question. You still keep copies of everything? Yes. Even when people tell you not to worry, especially then. He would laugh softly. That's my girl. One Tuesday, his voice sounded different. Do you remember the dining room floor? He asked. The one you made me sand for 3 weekends. You complained for 4. I was 16. You were dramatic. You paid me $12. That was fair money in 1999. It was not. He laughed, but then his voice lowered. Oak remembers pressure, Nora. I thought I had misheard him. What? A board will bend. It may look normal after the weight is gone, but the grain remembers. Dad, are you okay? Elaine's voice sounded in the background. He immediately changed tone. I'm fine. Just tired. The call ended 30 seconds later. That was the last private conversation I had with him. My father died on a Thursday morning in late October. Elaine said she found him in his recliner with the television on and a cup of tea beside him. The preliminary cause was cardiac arrest. He had known heart disease, and nothing about the death appeared suspicious. I drove to the house in the rain. Elaine met me at the door wearing gray slacks and one of my father's old cardigans. Her face was pale but controlled. She hugged me for exactly as long as courtesy required. He went peacefully, she whispered. I wanted to believe that. I still do. The house smelled like lemon polish and wet coats. A paramedic carried equipment through the hallway. A police officer asked routine questions. My father's body was still in the living room, covered to the shoulders. I knelt beside him and touched his hand. It was colder than I expected. Grief is strange. It can turn a person into an object and an object into a person. My father's hand felt unfamiliar. His dented watch on the side table felt alive. Elaine stood behind me and said, "We should let them take him. We." It was a small word, but something in the way she used it made me feel like a visitor. The funeral took place 5 days later. Martin Vale attended. He shook my hand, expressed sympathy, and told me he would contact us once the death certificate was available. Your father's affairs were straightforward, he said. Did he have a current will? Yes. Am I named in it? His expression did not change. There is a modest bequest. How modest? This is not the place. He rested one hand lightly on my elbow, guiding me away from the receiving line. It was a polite gesture. It was also controlling. Your father's estate was not what people may assume, he continued. There were medical expenses, tax obligations, and certain investment losses. What investments? Your father relied on professional advisors. Which advisors? Martin gave me a patient smile. Nora, grief can make details feel urgent. They are not. Let us proceed in order. I had spent 17 years hearing variations of that sentence from insurers, vendors, and billing contractors. Do not worry, it is being handled. The details are complicated. Trust the process. Those phrases are not always dishonest, but dishonest people love them. The will was read in Martin's office the following Monday. Elaine sat beside me at a long walnut table. She wore black and carried a leather folder. Martin's assistant placed water in front of us, though neither of us drank. The will had been signed 14 months earlier. Elaine received the investment accounts, the rental duplex, my father's truck, and nearly all personal property. I received the house on Birch Hollow Road, including all fixtures and contents remaining therein. At first, I thought I had misunderstood. The house had been appraised at approximately $240,000. It carried no mortgage, which made it a meaningful inheritance. But compared with the assets I believed my father owned, the division felt strange. What were the investment accounts worth? I asked. Martin folded his hands. At death, substantially less than anticipated. How much less? The estate inventory is still being prepared. Elaine spoke gently. Daniel had some bad luck, Nora. With what? Private placements. A development fund. He trusted the wrong people. She looked at Martin, and something passed between them too quickly to name. I opened my notebook. What was the fund called? Martin's smile thinned. This is precisely why we should avoid informal discussion before the accounting is complete. Then when will I receive the accounting? As beneficiary of a specific device, you may not be entitled to all underlying financial records. I knew enough to understand the distinction. I also knew he had answered a different question. Was my father insolvent? No. Was the estate required to liquidate assets to cover debts? Not at present. Then I would like a copy of the will and any codicils. You will receive what you are entitled to receive. Elaine touched my wrist. Please don't turn this into a conflict. It was the first time anyone had suggested there was a conflict. I had only asked for documents. I looked at her hand until she removed it. 2 days later, I went to the house. Elaine had already taken most of the furniture. The dining table was gone. The antique cabinet my mother had inherited was gone. My father's tools were gone except for a cracked level and 2 rusted clamps. Even the blue ceramic bowl that had sat near the front door for my entire childhood had disappeared. The rooms echoed. In the kitchen, square patches of cleaner paint showed where pictures had hung. A single coffee cup remained in the cabinet. The refrigerator hummed in an otherwise silent house. I walked from room to room, trying to understand what my father had left me. An empty house. No letter. No explanation. No photograph. Nothing that said he had remembered the woman who had once sanded his oak floor for $12. I was standing in the dining room when my phone rang. The caller identified himself as a contractor named Ben Caro. I'm returning your call about floor removal, he said. I didn't call you. There was a pause. Someone named Nora Ellis called our office this morning. Said she'd inherited the property and needed the dining room floor removed before listing. What number did she call from? I'd have to check. Did she say why the floor needed to come out? Water? Damage? I think. I looked down. The oak boards were scratched and dull but dry. Did she schedule anything? No. She wanted an estimate for immediate demolition. My mouth went dry. Please email me whatever information you have. Do not give it to anyone else. After the call, I remained in the dining room. The house settled around me. A pipe clicked inside the wall. Rain pressed softly against the windows. Then I remembered my father's words. Oak remembers pressure. I knelt and ran my hand across the floor. Most of the boards were narrow strips laid in the late 1980s. My father had installed them himself. Near the baseboard, beneath the place where the china cabinet had stood, 3 boards were slightly wider. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for a carpenter's daughter. I returned the next morning with a flashlight, gloves, a pry bar, and the old cracked level Elaine had left behind. The wider boards did not respond at first. My father had face-nailed them, then filled the holes to match the grain. It was careful work, designed to look permanent. But permanent and inaccessible are not the same thing. After 40 minutes, the first board lifted. Beneath it was black roofing felt. My heart began to pound. I removed the second board, then the third. The steel compartment was fitted so precisely between the joists that it appeared to be part of the house. There was no lock, only 6 recessed screws. Inside, everything had been wrapped in waxed cloth. The ledger came first. My father's handwriting covered 57 pages. Dates, account numbers, transfers, names, amounts. Several entries referred to Northbridge Asset Recovery. Others referred to Mercer Consulting, which I later learned was a company registered to Elaine's brother. The 3 safe deposit keys were taped inside the back cover. Beneath the ledger was a trust agreement dated 6 years earlier, the Daniel R. Ellis Family Preservation Trust. Initial funding, $2,800,000. Current estimated assets, written in my father's hand 9 months before his death, $9,142,000. Sole remainder beneficiary, Nora Ellis. Trust protector and independent counsel, Martin Vale. The document was notarized. There were amendments attached, but none changed the beneficiary. The final item was an audio cassette inside a plastic case. Across the label my father had written, "For Nora, play only after I am gone. Do not trust a copy. I did not own a cassette player." For a few seconds, that absurd fact nearly broke me. My father had left me $9 million, evidence of a hidden trust, and a recording I could not hear because technology had moved on without us. Then I heard a vehicle outside. A black sedan slowed in front of the house. It did not stop. I watched it pass through the gap in the curtains. I could not see the driver clearly, but the passenger turned toward the house. It was Martin Vale. I replaced the floorboards as well as I could, put the compartment's contents into my tote bag, and left through the back door. I drove 3 miles before realizing I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers hurt. Fear is strange. It does not always make you small. Sometimes it makes the world unusually precise. I noticed the click of my turn signal, the crack in the windshield of the car ahead of me, the smell of old coffee in my cup holder, the fact that the black sedan remained 2 vehicles behind me through 3 turns. I did not drive home. I pulled into the parking garage beneath the hospital where I worked, used my employee badge to enter the secure administrative floor, and placed the documents in a locked records cabinet. Then I sat in a conference room with the lights off. I was not brave, I was careful. There is a difference. At 6 that evening, I bought a cassette player from a resale shop on Glenway Avenue. The clerk was young enough to ask what it was. I told him it was a kind of memory. I listened to the tape in my car beneath the garage lights. My father's voice emerged through static. "Nora, if you are hearing this, I did not manage to fix what I allowed to happen. I stopped the tape. For a long time, I could not breathe properly. Then I pressed play again." He explained that 12 years earlier, he had purchased a state lottery ticket with 3 other men from a construction crew. They had used the same numbers for years. One of the tickets won a large jackpot. After taxes and division, my father's share had been a little over $3 million. He told almost no one. He placed the money into a trust because he did not want it to change our relationship or attract relatives. He invested conservatively through a private advisor introduced by Martin Vale. For years, the trust grew. Then Elaine discovered it. My father did not explain how. He only said that, after she learned about the money, documents began changing. Accounts were moved. New companies appeared. Martin assured him the restructuring was necessary for taxes and asset protection. By the time my father realized funds were being redirected, Elaine held power of attorney over several accounts, and Martin controlled the trust's legal records. "I signed things I should not have signed," my father said. "I was embarrassed. Then I became afraid. That admission hurt more than the money. My father had spent his life repairing other people's homes. He could sister a cracked joist, shore up a foundation, and rebuild a staircase so smoothly that no one could see where the damage had been. But shame had convinced him that his own mistake could not be repaired. He had begun keeping a parallel record, the ledger beneath the floor, copies of statements in a safe deposit box, letters to regulators that Martin had supposedly mailed but had never produced responses to. The trust document was genuine, my father said, but Martin had pressured him to sign a later amendment removing me and appointing Elaine as beneficiary. My father refused. Several weeks later, Elaine presented him with what she said was the completed amendment. The signature looked like his. It was not. I confronted Martin, my father said on the tape. He told me signatures are only one part of intent. That was his phrase. He said intent can be demonstrated many ways. I paused the recording again. That was not legal advice. It was a warning. My father believed Elaine and Martin intended to use the forged amendment after his death. He had hidden the original trust documents because he feared they would destroy them. The keys opened boxes at 3 different banks. He told me to contact an attorney named Rebecca Shaw. Do not use anyone Martin recommends, he said. Do not confront Elaine, and do not go to the banks alone. At the end of the tape, his voice changed. It became softer. I should have told you sooner. I thought protecting you meant keeping you outside the problem. Your mother used to say silence is not offense. It's a locked room. I understand that now. There was a scraping sound. Then he said the last words I ever heard from him. The house is yours because it is the one place where I still knew what was true. The tape clicked off. I sat beneath the parking garage lights until my coffee went cold. Then I opened a legal pad and began making a list. Original documents, audio recording, contractor impersonation, possible surveillance, safe deposit boxes, Rebecca Shaw, no confrontation. No disclosure to Martin, no disclosure to Elaine. At work we called it preserving the record. Before correcting an error, you secured the original claim, the audit trail, and every version of the transaction. Otherwise, the person responsible could say the system had changed, the file had been corrupted, or the evidence had never existed. I photographed every page of the ledger. I scanned the trust documents to an encrypted drive. I made 2 copies of the cassette and stored the original in a bank box under my own name. Then I searched for Rebecca Shaw. She was a probate litigator with a small firm downtown. Her biography said she specialized in fiduciary misconduct, contested trusts, and financial exploitation of older adults. I called the next morning. Her assistant told me the earliest appointment was in 3 weeks. I said, "Please tell Miss Shaw that Daniel Ellis left a recording instructing me to contact her if Martin Vale attempted to administer his trust." The assistant became quiet. "Can you hold?" Rebecca came to the phone less than a minute later. "Do not discuss this with anyone," she said. "Bring copies, not originals. Come at 4. Her office was on the 9th floor of an older building overlooking the river. She was in her early 50s, with silver beginning at her temples, and the calm expression of someone who did not confuse urgency with panic. She listened to the tape without interrupting. She read the trust document. She studied the ledger. Then she asked me to describe everything that had happened since my father's death. When I told her about the contractor, she stopped writing. "Did you receive the call details?" "Yes." The contractor had emailed a screenshot from his business phone. The call came from a prepaid number purchased 2 days after my father died. Rebecca leaned back. "Martin contacted me 4 months ago," she said, "about my father. He asked a hypothetical question involving a client who claimed a trust amendment had been forged. He wanted to know how a court might treat competing originals." "Why did he ask you?" "We were opposing counsel in a fiduciary case several years ago. He may have wanted to assess how aggressively I would challenge it." "Did he name my father?" "No. But he mentioned a carpenter, a second marriage, an adult daughter, and approximately $9 million in dispute assets." My skin went cold. "So he knew my father might contact you?" "Yes. And he still attended the funeral and told me the estate was straightforward." Rebecca closed the ledger. "Professional misconduct does not always look unprofessional, Nora. Sometimes it arrives early, shakes your hand, and offers you water." She explained that we had several separate legal issues. The probate estate contained the house and whatever assets remained in my father's individual name. The trust existed outside probate, assuming it had not been lawfully revoked or amended. If Elaine and Martin produced a competing amendment, we would need to challenge its authenticity and the circumstances surrounding its creation. If money had been diverted through shell companies, we might also have claims for fraud, conversion, breach of fiduciary duty, elder financial exploitation, and possibly conspiracy. Possibly, I asked. A good lawyer does not promote an allegation before the evidence can carry its weight. What do we do first? We prevent movement. That evening, Rebecca prepared emergency letters to the 3 banks identified by the keys, placing them on notice of a trust dispute and demanding preservation of records. The next morning, she filed a petition in probate court seeking temporary restrictions on transfers linked to my father's estate and trust. She also arranged for a forensic document examiner to inspect the original trust agreement and a private forensic accountant named David Lynn to begin tracing the entities in my father's ledger. I signed authorizations. I gave a sworn statement. I did not call Elaine. That silence became difficult after she began calling me. Her first message was warm. Nora, I know we're both overwhelmed. Martin says there are a few routine documents you need to sign regarding the house. Call me when you can. The second was concerned. I drove by Birch Hollow and noticed you had been there. I hope you're not trying to move anything alone. That house has mold issues. The third was firmer. You need to understand that delaying probate creates costs for everyone. I forwarded every message to Rebecca. On the 4th day, Martin emailed me directly. He said a previously undisclosed trust amendment had been located among my father's papers. According to the amendment, the trust assets passed entirely to Elaine. My inheritance remained the house. He attached a scanned copy. My father's signature appeared at the bottom. It was dated 7 months before his death. The notary was Martin's legal assistant. The document stated that my father had removed me because we were substantially estranged. I read that sentence 3 times. The previous Tuesday, my father had called me to ask whether I still kept copies of everything. We had spoken nearly every week. I had taken him to 2 medical appointments that year. We spent Christmas together. I repaired his online pharmacy account. I still had a voicemail in which he asked me to bring lemon pie for his birthday. Estranged was not merely inaccurate. It was strategically chosen. If they could frame our relationship as distant, my exclusion would appear natural. Rebecca filed our objection that afternoon. Then the pressure became more personal. My aunt called from Indianapolis. Elaine had told her I was contesting my father's wishes because I wanted the money. My cousin sent a message saying grief was not an excuse for greed. A former neighbor told me Elaine was describing me as unstable and resentful of their marriage. Someone reported the Birch Hollow house to the city for unsafe conditions. Someone else contacted my employer's anonymous ethics line and alleged that I had accessed patient billing data for personal use. The allegation was false, and our access logs proved it within a day. But false accusations do not need to succeed to create pressure. They only need to consume your time, damage your sleep, and make every ordinary interaction feel contaminated. Rebecca advised me not to respond publicly. People who control the story early often panic when evidence arrives late, she said. David Lynn's first report arrived 2 weeks later. Northbridge Asset Recovery was not an investment company. It was a management entity with no employees, registered to a mailbox in Delaware. Over 4 years, it had received $1,700,000 from accounts connected to my father's trust. From there, the money moved through Mercer Consulting, Vale Fiduciary Services, and 2 real estate partnerships. Elaine's brother had received payments. Martin's law firm had received payments. A lake property had been purchased through one of the partnerships. The beneficial owners were Elaine Mercer Ellis and Martin Vale. That was the first concrete proof that the problem was not a misunderstanding, but it created a larger question. If nearly $2 million had already been diverted, where was the rest of the $9 million? The safe deposit boxes answered part of that question. Rebecca accompanied me to each bank. The first box contained original statements from the trust's brokerage accounts. The balances showed steady growth through diversified investments. The second contained letters my father had written to Martin demanding explanations for unauthorized transfers. Several had been marked received by Martin's office. None appeared in the files Martin produced to probate court. The third box contained something neither Rebecca nor I expected: a small digital voice recorder, a sealed DNA test, and a handwritten letter addressed to Elaine. The DNA test showed that my father was not the biological father of a 28-year-old man named Adrian Mercer. I knew Adrian as Elaine's nephew. He had attended family dinners, borrowed my father's truck, and once spent 6 months living in the basement while looking for work. According to the test, the probability that my father was Adrian's biological father was less than 1%. That seemed obvious. No one had ever claimed otherwise. But the letter revealed why the test mattered. Elaine had told my father that Adrian was his biological son from a brief relationship they had supposedly had before my parents married. She claimed she had hidden the pregnancy and allowed her sister to raise the child. My father believed her long enough to sign documents granting Adrian a future interest in several trust investments. Then he obtained the DNA test. The result proved the story was false. Elaine had not merely tried to influence his estate as his wife. She had manufactured a son. The voice recorder contained conversations between my father, Elaine, and Martin. My father had begun recording after discovering the forged amendment. In one conversation, Elaine spoke gently. "You're confused about the sequence, Daniel. That's what Martin is trying to explain. I know what I signed. You know what you remember signing." Martin's voice followed. "Memory is vulnerable, particularly when there are documented medical concerns. My father had no diagnosis affecting cognition, but they were creating one in conversation." In another recording, Martin said, "A private resolution protects Nora as much as anyone. Public litigation would expose family matters she may not wish examined." "What family matters?" my father asked. Martin paused. "Every family has them." It was a threat without a stated object. Professional, polite, designed to let imagination perform the violence. The most important recording lasted 11 minutes. My father confronted them about the transfers to Northbridge. Elaine denied understanding the structure. Martin said the payments represented advisory fees approved under the trust. My father demanded the signed approvals. Martin replied, "The absence of a document in your possession does not mean it does not exist." That sentence would later matter more than he understood, because when litigation began, Martin produced 7 approval forms bearing my father's signature. The forensic examiner determined that 4 signatures had been digitally copied from an old property deed. 2 were traced. 1 was genuine, but had been attached to a different document. People often believe a case turns on one dramatic piece of evidence. Ours did not. It turned on accumulation. The wrong phone number, the hidden ledger, the contractor call, the recorded threat, the forged amendment, the copied signatures, the shell companies, the missing letters, the false story about Adrian. Each piece was a board in a structure. Alone, some could bend. Together, they carried weight. The court issued a temporary restraining order freezing the disputed trust accounts and prohibiting Elaine, Martin, and their related companies from transferring assets. 3 days later, Elaine came to the Birch Hollow house. I was in the kitchen photographing water damage beneath the sink for an insurance claim when I saw her car. Rebecca had told me not to meet with her alone. I turned on the voice recorder on my phone and called Rebecca's office. Her assistant stayed on the line. Elaine knocked. When I opened the door, she was holding a covered casserole dish. For one irrational second, I remembered her bringing baked pasta after my surgery 8 years earlier. Manipulative people are not false every moment. That is what makes them difficult to understand. They may comfort you sincerely on Tuesday and betray you deliberately on Friday. Elaine looked past me into the empty hallway. "I thought you might not be eating." "I'm fine." "Can I come in?" "No." Her expression tightened, then softened. "I know you've hired someone. You should speak to my attorney. Martin says this can still be handled privately. Then Martin should speak to my attorney." She lowered her voice. "Your father was not well. He'd heart disease. He was paranoid. Did a doctor diagnose that? You didn't live with him." "No, you did." The casserole dish shifted in her hands. I loved your father. I believe you loved something about him. That is cruel. It is careful. She looked toward the dining room. It was only a glance, but it confirmed she knew. You found something, she said. I did not answer. Her face changed, not dramatically. Elaine did not lose control in visible ways. The warmth simply left her eyes. Daniel made recordings when he was angry. He also destroyed things when he calmed down. Context matters. So does authenticity. She stared at me. Then she said, Martin has represented judges, council members, hospital executives. Do you understand what prolonged litigation could do to your career? There it was. Not a threat, a forecast. I felt fear move through me, but I did not let it choose my words. Please leave the property. Nora, you are not permitted inside this house without my written consent. Future communication goes through counsel. She placed the casserole on the porch floor. At least take the food. No. For the first time, anger appeared. You think you're different from everyone else because you keep files. No, I said. I think files make it harder for people to redefine what happened. She left without another word. The casserole remained on the porch until the assistant confirmed Elaine had driven away. Then I photographed it, sealed it in a trash bag without opening it, and documented the time. That may sound excessive. By then, excess caution felt healthier than misplaced trust. The legal battle lasted 14 months. Martin resigned as trustee only after the court ordered him to produce the complete trust file. He claimed several records had been lost during an office server migration. A forensic technology specialist recovered deleted emails from a backup account. Those emails showed that Martin and Elaine had discussed removing me from the trust nearly 2 years before my father's death. One message from Elaine read, Daniel will not agree while Nora remains involved. Martin replied, then the record must reflect increasing distance and diminished capacity. They began creating that record. Elaine scheduled neurological appointments my father had not requested. She emailed Martin descriptions of supposed memory lapses. Martin drafted notes memorializing telephone conversations that never occurred. They were building 2 narratives at once. In the first, my father was competent enough to remove me and approve millions in fees. In the second, he was too confused to challenge the documents afterward. Contradictions do not always defeat dishonest people immediately. Sometimes contradictions are their strategy. They use whichever version serves the moment, trusting that no one will place the statements side by side. My profession had trained me to do exactly that. Rebecca asked me to build a chronology. I created a spreadsheet with every known date, transaction, email, medical appointment, phone call, and document. I linked each entry to supporting evidence. When Martin claimed my father had become estranged from me in January, I attached phone records showing 23 calls between us over the next 4 months. When Elaine claimed he had voluntarily approved Northbridge fees, I attached a recording of him demanding the money be returned. When Martin claimed the amendment had been signed in his office on March 18, building access records showed his legal assistant was in Florida that week. The assistant was the notary. During her deposition, Rebecca placed the amendment in front of her. Did you witness Daniel Ellis sign this document? The assistant looked at Martin's attorney. He objected. Rebecca repeated the question. The assistant said, "It is my signature and seal." That was not my question. Another objection. The judge later ordered her to answer. After a long silence, she said, "I do not specifically recall Mr. Ellis signing. Were you in Ohio on March 18? I don't remember." Rebecca displayed airline records subpoenaed from the assistant's travel account. She had flown to Miami on March 15 and returned March 21. The amendment claimed it was notarized in Cincinnati on March 18. That was when their story began to collapse in public. Martin remained calm throughout his own deposition. He wore a navy suit and spoke with the patient precision of someone accustomed to being believed. He said my father had requested the amendment. He said the Northbridge arrangement had been fully disclosed. He said Elaine's involvement was administrative. He said his personal ownership in the lake property was unrelated. Rebecca placed the forged approval forms in front of him. Did your office create these documents? My office prepared documents at Mr. Ellis's direction. Did Daniel Ellis sign them? To the best of my knowledge. Did you witness the signatures? Not all of them. Which ones? I would need to review my notes. Your notes indicate you witnessed all 7. Then that was likely accurate at the time. Rebecca placed the forensic report beside the forms. 4 signatures are pixel identical to a signature from a 2016 deed. Are you asking us to believe Daniel Ellis reproduced his signature with exact pixel alignment 4 separate times? Martin's attorney objected. Martin drank water. For the first time, his hand trembled. I am not a forensic specialist, he said. No, Rebecca replied. You are the attorney who submitted the documents to the court. The truth has a weight of its own, but someone must place it on the table. The most damaging evidence came from Adrian Mercer. At first, he refused to cooperate. Then federal investigators showed him transfers totaling $480,000 into an account opened in his name. Adrian claimed he had not known about the account. His signature appeared on the opening documents, but security footage showed Elaine entering the bank with a man wearing Adrian's identification. The man was Elaine's brother. Adrian accepted limited immunity in exchange for testimony. He admitted Elaine had told him to describe my father as his biological parent if anyone asked. She promised he would inherit enough money to start a business. He also admitted entering the Birch Hollow house 2 days after the funeral and searching my father's office. Did you remove documents? Rebecca asked him in court. Yes. Which documents? I don't know. Aunt Elaine gave me a list. Did the list mention the dining room? Yes. The courtroom became completely still. What did it say? He swallowed. Check beneath the cabinet. Remove floor if necessary. That instruction explained the contractor call. They had known my father hid something beneath the floor, but not exactly where. My father had moved the cabinet himself months before he died. The wide boards were no longer directly beneath it. Adrian searched the wrong section. Then Elaine hired someone using my name, hoping demolition would reveal what Adrian had missed. That was the first mistake she made after my father's death. Not the fraud, not the forged amendment, the phone call. She had acted too quickly. The contractor's records connected the prepaid number to a payment card purchased by Elaine's brother. Store video showed him buying it. The investigation expanded beyond probate court. The state attorney general's office opened an elder financial exploitation case. Federal prosecutors reviewed wire transfers that crossed state lines. The disciplinary board suspended Martin's law license pending formal proceedings. Elaine's attorneys approached Rebecca with a settlement proposal. They offered to return $4 million, transfer the lake property to the trust, and withdraw the amendment if I agreed to confidentiality and release them from all civil claims. Rebecca asked me what I wanted. The number was life-changing. Even after taxes and fees, it would have given me more security than I had ever imagined. But the offer required me to describe the dispute as a private family misunderstanding. It required silence about Martin's conduct. It required dismissal of claims that could help other clients discover what he had done with their money. I thought about my father on the cassette. I signed things I should not have signed. I was embarrassed, then I became afraid. Silence had already cost him years. No, I told Rebecca. She nodded once. I expected that. The probate trial lasted 9 days. I testified on the 4th. Martin's attorney tried to present me as resentful, financially motivated, and overly suspicious because of my compliance work. He asked how much money I earned. He asked whether I had debts. He asked whether I believed I deserved more than my father's wife. I am not asking the court to decide what I deserve, I said. I am asking the court to determine which documents are genuine and where the trust assets went. He asked whether I disliked Elaine. I trusted her for many years. But you dislike her now? I do not think my feelings authenticate signatures. The judge looked down, but I saw the corner of her mouth move. When Elaine testified, she cried quietly. She described caring for my father, managing his medications, and protecting him from financial stress. Much of that may have been true. People are often uncomfortable with stories in which someone can be both caregiver and exploiter. We prefer clean categories. They make judgment easier. But human beings are not invoices. Good entries do not erase fraudulent ones. Rebecca asked Elaine why she had told my father Adrian was his. Elaine said my father had misunderstood a private family conversation. Rebecca played the recording in which Elaine said, "He has your eyes, Daniel. You owe him the truth." Elaine claimed the recording had been edited. The forensic audio expert testified that it had not. Rebecca asked why Northbridge paid for renovations to the lake house. Elaine said she believed the property belonged to the trust. The deed listed her and Martin as beneficial owners. She said Martin handled the paperwork. Rebecca asked about the contractor. Elaine denied arranging it. Then prosecutors provided the payment card evidence. By the time she left the witness stand, she was still composed. But composure is not credibility. The judge issued a 112-page decision. She found the disputed amendment invalid due to forgery, improper notarization, lack of credible evidence of intent, and overwhelming evidence of undue influence. She removed Martin permanently as trustee. She ordered Elaine, Martin, Northbridge, Mercer Consulting, and the real estate partnerships to return all traceable trust assets. She imposed compensatory damages, attorney fees, and punitive damages under the state's elder exploitation statute. The court also referred the forged documents and false testimony to criminal authorities. The final accounting showed that the trust's legitimate investments, frozen early enough to prevent further transfers, were worth approximately $7,300,000. Recovered property and funds brought the total above $9 million again, though legal costs and taxes reduced what remained. Martin eventually pleaded guilty to wire fraud, tampering with records, and conspiracy. He surrendered his law license and received a federal prison sentence. His assistant cooperated and received probation. Elaine pleaded guilty to financial exploitation, fraud, and conspiracy. Her sentence included prison time, restitution, and supervised release. Her brother also entered a plea. Adrian was not charged under the cooperation agreement, though he forfeited the money connected to the scheme. I did not attend the sentencing hearings. Rebecca went. She called afterward and gave me the facts. That was enough. Justice did not feel like celebration. It felt like the moment after a loud machine stops running. Silence, followed by the realization that your body had been bracing against the noise. The house on Birch Hollow Road remained mine. For months, I could not decide what to do with it. Every room carried two histories, the ordinary history of my childhood and the hidden history of my father's fear. I repaired the dining room floor myself, not because I was skilled enough to match my father's work, but because I needed to understand how it had been built. I removed each damaged board carefully. I cleaned the joists. I treated a small patch of moisture near the exterior wall. Then I installed new oak, leaving one original wide board in place. Beneath it, I put nothing valuable, only a copy of my father's last letter and a note in my own handwriting. Truth should not have to live underground. I sold the house the following spring to a young couple with 2 children. They loved the backyard and the old maple tree. The husband asked why one dining room board was wider than the others. I told him the house had been repaired. That was true. I bought a small home outside Cincinnati with a narrow garden and a porch just large enough for 2 chairs. I stayed at my job, though I reduced my hours and began teaching occasional workshops on financial exploitation and record preservation. I created a fund through a local legal aid organization to help older adults obtain independent review of estate and power of attorney documents. I did not name it after my father. He would have hated that. Instead, we called it the Second Look Fund, because sometimes that is all a person needs, someone willing to look again, at the signature, at the transfer, at the explanation that almost makes sense. I traveled modestly. I took the train to Chicago. I spent a week in Maine and learned that I liked quiet harbors more than crowded resorts. I planted tomatoes badly, then learned to plant them better. I bought a wooden dining table from a local craftsman and paid him what he asked without bargaining. For years, I thought healing would arrive as a feeling. It did not. It arrived as routine. Coffee on the porch. A locked door that made me feel safe instead of trapped. Work that still mattered. Friends who did not ask how much money I had. Nights when my phone remained silent, and silence no longer felt threatening. I listened to my father's cassette only once more. On the anniversary of his death, I sat at my kitchen table and played it from beginning to end. This time, I did not hear only fear, I heard effort. He had made mistakes, but he had also documented them. He had hidden the truth, but he had left me a path toward it. He had not repaired everything. He had placed the tools where I could find them. For a long time, I was angry that he had waited so long to trust me. Eventually, I understood that shame changes the scale of a problem. A small confession can feel heavier than a house. A request for help can feel like admitting that every strong thing people believed about you was false. My father had built his identity around being capable. Elaine and Martin did not create that pride. They simply learned how to use it. Money was never the deepest injury. The deepest injury was watching trust become a weapon. It was learning that affection could be documented, redirected, and presented as evidence of consent. It was seeing how professional language could disguise ordinary theft.